jump.
6:41, switching from petrol to electric cars, eating less meat and dairy and taking fewer flights. Just some of the steps people may have to take if the UK is to meet a new legally binding target on greenhouse gases.
The government is promising to bring emissions down to almost zero by the year 2050, making us the first G7 nation to put forward that sort of legislation. But how feasible actually is it? We're joined now by climate change analyst Tom Burke, who's in our newsroom in London. Good morning to you.
Morning, Gav.
Really interested in talking to you about this. Just remind our viewers, first of all, carbon neutral. What exactly does that term mean?
It basically means that if we burn any fossil fuels, then we will be offsetting that consumption of fossil fuels by planting trees or doing other things that help to remove carbon from the atmosphere. It means we won't exactly have stopped burning fossil fuels, but we'll be very close to it.
Okay, so in terms of changes in everyday life, Louise was saying there about changing our diet a little bit and the amount that we travel by plane. What sort of other changes are we making? So I was just thinking this morning, there are millions of us who have gas central heating. So what will happen to that? How do you practically change a system like that, which has been in place for such a long time?
Well, you don't do it overnight, that's for sure. But I think the most important thing and the fastest and quickest thing we can do to get emissions down is to improve the efficiency with which we use energy, and in particular with the way in which we provide heat in buildings. So that's not really a question of people having to change their lifestyles so much as us investing as a nation in the infrastructure of our buildings so that we actually get energy bills down as well as emissions down and make life just as comfortable for everybody now as it is then, as it is now.
I don't know if you had a scan of the papers this morning, but the front page of The Guardian, extreme weather triggers the fastest carbon emissions rise in a decade. They're saying carbon emissions from the global energy industry rose at the fastest rate in almost a decade after extreme weather last year. And they were saying that there's gas consumption's the biggest jump in gas consumption for more than 30 years. I mean, we're in a bit of a pickle over this, aren't we?
Well, except the gas consumption has been going down for the whole of this century in the United Kingdom and indeed throughout Europe. So you've got to be careful. It is going up in other parts of the world, but our own gas consumption has gone down really quite dramatically in the last decade. So what you've got to do is just make a real commitment to driving forward and not be thrown off course by the odd blip like the extreme weather did last year. Part of the reason for that was it actually makes getting hydropower more difficult because you have drought in many parts of the world, slows down the production of electricity from hydropower, means you've got to replace it with currently gas. But if you deploy your renewables faster, then when you have these extreme weather events, your renewables are there to provide you with the lost supply.
Do you think that some of the protests we've seen from people like Extinction Rebellion and others as well, do you think that has made a difference with regards to these sorts of things?
Yeah, I think it has made a difference. I think it's changed the conversation. It's brought the issue much further up the political agenda, and that's, as it were, added to the way in which events, just the extreme weather events you mentioned, Dan, are actually driving people's awareness up, and that's slowly beginning to get governments to get up to speed on dealing with the problem. You can't expect the people on their own to deal with this. You've really got to have very strong government action, which is why it is so welcome that the government's made this announcement today.
There's two other things I wanted to check with you. Talking about government action, I mean, the person responsible for maybe implementing quite a bit of this legislation, trying to get it through, could be the next Prime Minister. Have you been listening, I'm sure, and have you been impressed with any of the green pledges you've heard from some of those potentials?
I've been hearing a lot of greening going on, but actually the reality is that it's what you do, not what you say, that matters. And there's been quite a gap, in a way, emerging recently between what the government has said it wants to do on climate change and the fact that the policies aren't in place to deliver on the existing carbon budgets, let alone the carbon budgets we'll need if we're to meet this new commitment. And, you know, people say things at elections. What really matters is what they follow through with. And overall, it would be much better for climate change and the environment in general if we didn't leave the EU, if we, as it were, did no Brexit rather than no deal.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Tom Burke. Much to think about. I was having a look at, Tom was talking there about how much it will cost. The Treasury estimate those plans would cost £1 trillion. But then the argument, I suppose, is how much it would cost if you didn't implement those changes in the long term as well. So much financial head scratching going on over that, I think.